So we're talking about what makes an issue an ethical issue. And a very broad definition of what makes something an ethical issue is either that it involves some basic question of right and wrong, or there is some fundamental value at stake. Now, there may be some disagreement across philosophers we're going to study about that definition of what makes something ethical. So to make that a little clearer, since that's easy to say, but it's not always easy to identify and articulate what the specific ethical issue is in a given situation, I'm going to clarify it by asking my favorite question, as opposed to what. And this may be the point when you want to start taking notes, by the way. So as opposed to what, I call this the most philosophical question that there is. And so the first thing I'll talk about is that ethical issues are different from legal issues, different from religious issues, and different from what we'll call pragmatic issues. And I'll give you a description and an example for each one of those. These are not mutually exclusive categories. They can overlap with one another, but none of them has exactly the same range as the category of the ethical. So ethical issues are not legal questions. They overlap with legal questions, but legal and ethical are separate categories. Here's an example. Lying to your best friend about something important is usually not illegal. But in most situations, most of us would say lying to your best friend about something important is unethical. You can get away with it. You're not going to be arrested or fined for it, but it's wrong. It's not a matter of a legal issue. It's a matter of an ethical issue. That's the category it falls under. And on to religion. There's a bit more to be said about ethical issues being different from religious issues. So when we're talking about ethical issues, we're not talking about religious issues. Those two overlap, but they're different conceptual categories. There's a couple of good, clear reasons for this. The first is, if you say something is wrong because your religion says it's wrong, what about someone who doesn't believe in your religion, right? You still think it's wrong, but you're going to disagree about that probably because they're going to say, well, I don't believe in Mormonism, and so why should I believe you when you say that something is unethical? We can also look at it in terms of reward and punishment, right? So if my reason, so one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not murder. If my reason for not murdering is because I'm afraid that God will punish me with hell because I murder someone, or that the universe is going to get back at me through karma, then the reason I'm not murdering people is not because I think it's wrong. The reason I'm not murdering people is because I'm afraid God or the universe is going to get me if I do murder for someone. But it becomes an ethical issue. Murdering and not murdering becomes an ethical issue and not a legal or a religious issue if your reason for not murdering people you feel like murdering, and we all do, let's admit it, occasionally have that impulse. If your reason is that you're convinced that it's not right, then it is an ethical issue and not a religious issue, right? If you're convinced on the basis of your own reason, your own feelings, your own judgment, then you're in ethical territory. And so how can you separate that if you're a religious person? Well, here's how you can separate it philosophically. Run this experiment. Pretend for a minute that God doesn't exist. Would you still not murder people when you have the urge to do it? If you would, then your reasons for not murdering, some of them are religious, but even if the religious was taken away, the religious motivation was taken away, you would still have an ethical reason for not doing it, okay? I'll come back to pragmatic issues in a moment. So in one of Plato's dialogues, Socrates tells a story of the ring of Gyges. It's a myth, but like most myths, it makes a good point. So what the ring of Gyges does is if you turn it around, that's my wedding ring, if you turn it around on your finger, it makes you invisible, right? Why is Socrates mentioning that? Socrates' question is, if you owned this ring, is there anything you would do while you're invisible that you wouldn't do while you're visible, right? Would you use the ring to get away with things that you would not do if you were visible? Now, be honest with yourself. I'm not going to ask you, but be honest with yourself. I like to think of myself as a pretty good person, but I'm not perfect. And if I'm honest with myself, there probably are a couple of things that I would do with that ring, right? That I wouldn't want anybody to know about, right? There, I'm in ethical territory. So the third category, the third answer to my as opposed to what question is, ethical issues are different from pragmatic issues. And what I mean by pragmatic issues are issues of how we can get ahead in life or how we can even survive. So, for example, God forbid, one day I need a liver transplant really badly because I would die without one. And certainly there's no ethical issue with me getting on the official transplant list and waiting in line for a donor liver. But are there things that would be wrong to do even to stay alive? Well, maybe I have enough money, right? Maybe I could sell my piano, right? And try to buy a liver on the black market. We know it exists, right? Some countries are accused of harvesting organs from people who receive the death penalty and selling them, right, on the black market. So would it be pragmatic for me to find a way to buy one of those organs? The answer is yes, it would be pragmatic. I would save my life. I would have a much better chance of living a few more years than of waiting as number 472 on the transplant list. But would it be ethical for me to do it? And that, of course, is highly questionable. Okay, so